As we work our way through the playbook, how to navigate the fog of change, a big element remains. It's how it is we as leaders can leverage our board, underutilized most of the time. Let's find a way to do it. I'm Tom Dorley of Sage Partners. I'll be your host today. Today, for the third time, I'm joined by John Donovan. John and I have worked together years ago as strategy consultants back at Deloitte. John went on then to have a career as an entrepreneur, leading small companies, and then as CEO of AT&T. And now, since then, he's gone to the board side of things. Palo Alto Networks, Lockheed Martin, and a very interesting board, which we'll talk about at the end of this, and that is U.S. Steel / Nippon Steel. John, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here.
All right, so what we're going to talk about today is, as I said, the board is an asset. We need to find a way to use the board. And I'd like to start by saying that in these days of chaos, of the fog of change and all that, board members need to step up. So talk about how you see your role of the board in this time when it's a matter of just chaos and total change.
Yeah, I think it's the most interesting time of my career because, we spent much of my life in building processes for predictability.
Absolutely.
And we had predictability on the inputs, and we had sometimes uneven answers on the output side of things, but it wasn't chaotic because it came at such a pace. We created customer care if people had questions. We sent manuals to explain products. These are, by the way, chaotic defects, but they came at a pace that allowed us to manage them. And now we've taken a lot of that uncertainty from the output and we put it on the inputs. And so things are really up in the air right now. And I think that, historically, knowledge and experience were valued at such a high level that, boards were really engaged for experience and replicability. And so it wasn't built for new things. Mm-hmm. It was built to put guardrails in place so that new things looked like, traditional things. Mm-hmm. So this whole idea of predictable outcomes is sort of the formation and foundation of boards and governance and more generally. But I think right now we're giving way to where boards are expected to be more competent, to have more inputs on things, and to be sensors, if you will, for the business. So don't just bring your experience, bring that sort of knowledge at the edge that you're learning, day in and day out. And so I think boards now have to be filled with people that are intellectually curious, that are studying the industry or trying to bring the full capabilities that they've got sort of to the market, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I like that idea. So one of the things we're saying, and you and I remember back when we were doing our strategy engagements for clients at Deloitte, we would have 5-year plans. You remember that? And they were supposed to last 5 years. Yeah. Wow. Little tinkering here and there, a little adjustment, but basically that was it. And so today we're saying just exactly what you said, is that in general, we need to be more ready than right, because it's really tough to be right now. So we have to be flexible. We have to be alert. We have to be more ready than right. I think that's true. So here's a challenge for you, though, and you can speak to this because you're a CEO experienced and a board member. So you've been on the delivery end of the information flow as well as the receiving end. So one of the problems that we always encounter with boards is, how do you avoid the problem of board members being just too involved, so involved that they're disruptive versus too removed so that they can't help? How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, I think that, it really starts with board construction. I think that availability of a super talented board member doesn't make necessarily for a good fit. So if you look at a company and you take a horizon of the next couple of years and you say, what are the big changes we need to drive? What experience do we need? And then you really break that down a level and say, what functional help are we going to need? Would you rather drop down a level and get a chief marketing officer of a consumer company who's got way more experience at what's relevant than a high profile CEO of a large company? And so I think the makeup is one important element. I think the second thing is to build the processes that the board operates and executes so that there's sufficient time for proper discussions about things that are going to make a difference in the business, not just is it well governed. A well governed, poor performing company will always take a back seat to those that are appropriately governed and high performant.
Exactly.
Right. And so that's always a balance, is that you want the performant company first and foremost, and you want it to be well governed, where you're reliable and trustworthy and forthcoming, and that you have shareholders' interest in mind. And so I think building the construction and the process is underappreciated, because a lot of times we take best available candidate, sort of like the NFL draft, taking the best athlete doesn't help you get the team together that you need. And then underneath that, you have to have the process that provides sufficient time. And then I think after that, you start to build a really good rhythm with the management team, so they get what they need, the board, so that they do what they can to contribute. And I think you said it very well. Management needs to be ready, not right. And the board needs to be effectively supporting the performance of the business, as well as they are making sure that there's proper governance.
Yeah, so here's one thing I think that is probably embedded in what you say, but I'd like to flag, and that is the commitment of the board members have to be committed to what it takes to be effective. And my view is that today everybody needs to step up, right? That if in the past the amount of time, the amount of effort could be X, was at least 1.5x, maybe 2x, in terms of the activity, in terms of the attention of the board members.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a time dimension in readiness. I think there's also, historically, we learned our craft traditionally at school. We went into the company and we learned the particulars and gained experience. Then we learned some managerial capability, and now we have to, every person, revisit the foundation of that, which is the fundamental competency. Mm-hmm. The shelf life of competency is much shorter than it was when I studied electrical engineering. And so those foundations need to be constantly revisited, because things are moving so fast. Science is moving fast. The knowledge that we have, that we can now embed into workflows and processes that come out of AI and machines, it's happening at such a pace that individuals need to not rely on experience. They need to revisit competency, fundamental competency. And so I always used to tell people when I was on stage, I was a recovering engineer, and now I go on stage and say I'm a recovering executive.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that, and I think that's true. And I like the idea that says, and one of the other things you've done, because I listened to your little short podcast, and you talked about the amount of reading you do. And I joked in a response to that my wife is continually saying, eventually you have to get rid of some of those books, because I do the same thing. I have these tons of books, and some of them are my old favorites, and I keep them. But I do it because I'm trying to learn something new from social science or psychology or history or something. And I think just trying to sort of expand the capability. So I also I'm an engineering way back, and have to figure out how to provide new techniques to the clients that I work with.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think some of the biggest breakthroughs I've had in creative redirecting of technology comes out of either physics or biology. I have this belief that technology is just an abstraction of physical systems, and at some point the complexity that's in biological system makes the complexity of technology seem minor. Mm-hmm. As the physicists say, they stay out of biology because it's warm, wet, and unpredictable. It's so, like, there's a lot to learn from those things about how systems work, how efficiency things can be, and structures. And so I'm just a big fan of that. And I think that's why when you look at board diversity, I think there's, sort of diversities we always think about, but tenure diversity, that matters. Like, you want someone brand new who's saying, the old idea that everybody's experienced on the board for a long time and rolls their eyes when someone asks a dumb question. Mm-hmm. Those are no longer dumb questions. Why do we do
Right.
it that way? Why did we start doing it that way? Why wouldn't we try this? So, there's all these other things like which industries they come out of, which functions they come out of, which level they're at. I think sometimes getting someone who's an operating executive is better than someone who's a managing executive. And so those are the sorts of things that can build a chemistry where you're not only teaching. I always tell new board members, like the hardest thing to do is to realize when you go on a board, your job is to learn, then teach.
Mm-hmm.
And, you end your career by mostly teaching, but you have to go back to learn. Like, what am I going to do that's going to fit in? And I think management teams ought to really like challenge boards to arrive ready, not just to cover the script,
Yeah.
but like, hey, here's some real problems that we've had. And let's just deal with how do you guys recommend we move on that?
Yeah, this is a nice segue to the next topic, which is how it is you get out there in the world to find out that things are important. So on my last podcast was with Pete Hart. Pete is a former CEO of MasterCard, and then its chair, and then chair of Silicon Valley Bank. And he talked about in his companies wanting to have people who are today people and tomorrow people. We take that idea, we use it a little differently, but I think he was onto something, what you're saying there. You want people who can ask the dumb question, who can sort of reach out and say, yeah, I might have found something over here that may or may not be relevant. What do you think? And I like that. So we've taken that idea, but not that we stole it from Pete, but Pete reinforced it, and talk about the idea of having lookouts and scouts, and having ways in which we can figure out what's going on. So talk about, and then I'll talk a little more about lookouts and scouts, about how it is you and your other board members bring these new ideas in. Where do you find them? How do they come? How are they received? How do you segue into the conversation?
Yeah, I think that almost everybody who sits on a board has become accustomed to sourcing ideas, right? And the one that may get you to roll your eyes is the one where everything comes from history.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the comment you made about Pete being about present and future, the last thing you want is a group of historians trying to help the company with the idea that history always repeats itself, because context always changes. And, we roll through the same colors, but fashion never looks the same. There's always something different. And so I think that the framework I use, Tom, is, sense, analyze, and act. And analyze is now becoming a solved problem, if you will. And so there's an emphasis on sense. So the idea that you've got to get these inputs and organize them, because the edges are harder to get. They're more short-lived when you get them. Like building an edge in business now requires every resource you can to bring it in. And so I think that this is part of when you put an agenda together for management. So often the board's feedback as standard to management is give us more time to discuss things. Take fewer things, bring them up to a more strategic level, and let us discuss them. And that's what the management says they want. Right. But then what ends up happening is we devolve sometimes into read out. Oh, we're behind schedule because you asked 3 questions. I think we have to fundamentally get at that, and we have to ask ourselves, like, what's going to make the biggest difference in the business? I think the committees are where the governance is getting stronger and more reliable and more repeatable. And so what we thought of as governance is much more of a committee-related activity. Yes. Yeah. And then when you pull the full board together, it's much more about strategy and bringing those experiences together to try to get them augmented and come up with some creative solutions to new problems or new opportunities.
Yeah, I agree with that. That increasingly the important work is done at committee, which is then shared in the board and talked about what to do about. So when we talk about the idea of lookouts, and this is sort of not from the board level, but this is inside the organization, we believe there needs to be people who get out there, or teams that are trying to figure out what's going on. We call those people lookouts. They bring it into a group called scouts and say, does this make sense, before they take it forward? Reminds me of back when you and I used to do these strategy assignments. We would have a group of people that we would lead to go out to look at everything: customers, competition, profitability, and all that sort of thing. And then we'd bring it back to a group and we'd synthesize it. What does it mean? And then propose to the C-suite what to do about it. That's what I'm talking about. But back then, when our assignment was over, what happened? Everybody went back to their day job. They sort of disappeared. And what we're saying is that we really need to have inculcated in our organizations a forever group of lookouts, always looking out, always figuring out what's going on, and then bringing it back somewhere there can be synthesized. Sort of a capability that was transient or episodic needs to be ongoing.
Yeah. Well, let me share a story with you in my own experience of company 1 and company 10. And company 1, when I joined the board, I went in and I studied everything. I studied history. I studied, the history of the industry, the history of the geographical elements of it, the workforce elements of it, study. And then it makes me more effective because that context sits with me. And then when you get to company N, now I can actually do that with a prompt. And I can say to an AI agent, look, I need to get a historical brief. Give me a recommendation on a few books that cover these areas. And I narrow it. And then I say, okay, on a monthly basis, I'd like you to send me an email with a summary of these companies that would be company X, its competitors, and company Y. And then you break the horizon down and you do like a daily clipping on what matters in an industry. And now you have a framework that says I can do that with 1/10 the work. So if you want to build a superpower, the superpower is sort of the research and sensing. And I think there's great opportunities for us to use technology. But as you point out, the analysis of it is commoditized today. The synthesis of it and what to do with it, that's the value. So when you look at it, it's been very interesting because in this Sense, Analyze, Act, analyze was where all the action used to be. Yeah. And that's where experience and like the business analyst and the experienced pros would get together and say, well, what does it mean? Now all the value is in the sense and act. Where can I get sensors? Where can I get more of them? The scale of that is not the impediment that it once was. And then the only thing that matters ultimately is the actions we take. Yeah. And so it's just really the whole balance has been shifted, and that affects the boardroom, that affects, the C-suite. It's like throughout the company, it's all the way to the boiler room.
Yeah. And I see that, but that doesn't devalue experience, because experience says, I understand the context is different, but if something like this happens, here are the things that might be able to do it. There's a story I tell of a friend of mine whose son actually works for Deloitte Consulting as a BA. And he was saying with pride, there's nobody on our team who's over than 25. Wow, that's all we need. And my reaction was, okay, great. You're getting the first part of it, the analyzing all that piece. You do need somebody to be able to say, make sense of it. So hopefully our Deloitte Consulting brethren, John, have had a little bit of that seasoning or that more senior dust to sort out all that kind of stuff. I hope they have.
Yeah, irrespective, I think this is the most exciting time for any level of experience, because the field that matters the most now has no experts. People can say they're an expert, but the expertise is 4 years old. When you start to get the intersection of this new technology, its power and capability, with how do I discern the right actions to take? How do I bring experience to the table? You have brand new territory without, it's an unpopulated intersection.
Yes,
and so it's so exciting right now to be able to feel like you can bring all that stuff to bear tomorrow and the day after and the day after.
Yeah. And that's what I'm telling to our grandchildren and to other people like that, it's different than it was 10 years ago in terms of your entry-level job and all that sort of thing. But my God, it's exciting. Anytime that there's so much change going on, there's just enormous opportunity and great opportunity to sort of jump forward into something brand new, which is very, very exciting. I like that.
Yeah. I had this conversation with my son-in-law, and I think one of the interesting elements is when you take these natives that are coming out that know the new technology, they should not be limited by inheriting our structures.
Yes.
that have even the phrase entry level or like the evolutionary or the promotion path. And I was trying to tell him, at your capability, you should aspire to do something I could never aspire to.
Hmm.
Like to say, I'm going to, drive to cure a cancer type because I can get a CRISPR database and I know the math well enough to know how to get the algorithms in to like push the boundaries.
Hmm.
So you can aspirationally shoot far higher into space than ever before. And like, to me, that's super exciting. And that's why I say, like, inheriting
Yeah.
a structure which
Yes.
says, I want to be on a team of X size doing Y stuff and, get paid Z money. That those things are, I think, are going to fall a little bit by the wayside. So I think small is going to be the new big,
Yes.
and new is going to, the newness and freshness of this, it gives an equal opportunity for almost everybody out there.
I think that's right. If you have then sort of a moment without sort of violating any confidences, let's talk a little bit about U.S. Steel, because I find it to be an incredible model of public-private connection, where you have a more innovative company, Nippon, with a sort of whatever traditional company in the U.S. We need to have steel as a national security issue. So I'm just, and plus, I like the way you've created the board. You got what, 3 outsiders, 4 insiders. That's really nice. And so it's not like the federal government is making an investment, tossing some money and say, go do something like maybe in the past. It's saying, wait a minute, here's what we need done. And we're going to have folks like you in there who are going to make sure they do get done.
Yeah, it's a novel idea. There's not government investment, but there is a national security agreement surrounding it.
Right.
And it was, the first of the golden shares as,
Right.
and so, that provides some interesting dimensions to it. But I think it was a deal that was really well struck by the U.S. government.
Mm-hmm.
It is augmenting expertise of Nippon as a global player, commitment to blast furnaces, and sort of optimizing the traditional business, and then U.S. Steel with its new mini mills and kind of the tradition it's got. It's a nice marriage, and I think it's going to yield because I think that there's a commitment now to investment. The new projects are rolling out, and I think it's going to be a hyper competitive company and what's going to continue to be a very important industry, as you point out, for national security reasons, and just generally the ability to build at the pace that you're capable of. I'm very bullish and optimistic about the opportunity for the U.S. to start to post growth rates in the 4 and 5% range, which I don't think I have a big parade behind me believing
You
that's
do not.
possible.
You do not. Yeah.
But I think
Scott Bessett maybe is on your team right there.
Well,
yeah.
I think, yeah, I'm sure he is, and Howard Lutnick. I think that we have to unlock the potential of the employment we've got in the U.S. We've got nearly 40% of the eligible workforce not seeking work. I think that's a tremendous potential.
Yeah.
And I think that we have the right tools right now, and so I'm an eternal optimist, but I'm also a near-term optimist. And I think that reindustrialization theme is strong. I think our infrastructure's 100 years old. I think our tech is 50 years old, the architecture that it sits on. And so I think reindustrialization is going to be both digital and physical. And so I think that cycle that we're heading into is very exciting.
Yeah, and that's sort of a message I'm trying to take to everybody I talk to about how it is. Are there going to be disruptions? Sure. We have to find a way through the transition, absolutely. But take it upon yourself to do what you said. Figure out what competence are going to be necessary, and then build yourself so that you are good for that. So, John, in the last couple of minutes, you've had a great career. What does the future look like for you? How do you see yourself? I don't know. I'm not going to put a time frame on it, but some years down the road. I think you have quite a bit of runway left. What do you plan to do with it?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. And I had a bit of an epiphany yesterday because I try to organize my activity under a philosophy and maybe a strategy. But I told myself my job right now is to take my experience and digitize it so that I have a coworker with me that's me.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been building that. And I have a really interesting knowledge graph. And then I built my alter ego, which is my critic. And I put those into a formal model in a knowledge graph, and I work with it. And like, I view that I now have to get everything I want and believe into a form that can be interacted with. And I started by thinking it'd be like a nice project for the kids. So my kids could look and say, hey, what would John do in this situation? Say, just program it in and it'll come back and it'll tell you. And it's expanded. So I've taken everything I know, for instance, like go to market. And I partnered up with a knowledge graph to really dig into it. So all my thinking about how to run a sales organization, how to build a sales organization, digital marketing, compensation, I get all that stuff in, and it organizes all my thinking, but then I can be current from there. And so then, how do you net all that out? I netted it all out to say, I'm kind of going back to as if I just graduated college. Like that's the level of excitement that I have right now for taking the new tools, the new methods, and making a difference in the build process. So I was joking earlier with you offline about, I used to get introduced as the, CEO executive, and I would say I'm a recovering engineer in case I, sort of become a geek and I say something that's really nerdy, like, forgive me, I'm an engineer. And now I'm doing the opposite. I was speaking recently and they sort of said my background. And I said, I'm a recovering executive. And what I do now for a living is kind of engineering. And so like, I'm the most excited I've been in my career about, kind of turning a chapter and seeing the next one. I always joke, it's like the Wizard of Oz. We're going from black and white to Technicolor. It's that profound for me. So I'm as excited as I've ever been, busy as I've ever been. And it's just really a great time.
I love that, John. I think it's really important. In my case, one of the things I'm trying to say is I'm trying to pay it forward. Put the stuff that I know that can be helpful and share it with as many people as possible. Speaking on podcasts, whenever we're sort of around, maybe pubcasts too, by that matter. But whenever
you are Irish, yeah.
That's true. As are you.
Yeah,
That's right.
I didn't flinch. I'm like, that's perfectly normal for us.
That's the way it is. But at any rate, and I still look forward to what's going to happen, and I am excited. I don't know quite what it's going to be, but I do think it's going to be good. Now I'm an optimist, but I'm not a sort of a optimist like this. Everything will work out, right? You got to make it work. I believe that too. Yeah. So thank you, John. Let's stay in touch. I'll reach out to you again soon when I need some of your wisdom. And until then, everybody, thank you for listening to this important conversation. Take care and be well. Change has never come faster or hit us harder. In the fog, leadership is the light that cuts through. I'm Tom Dorley. Thanks for joining me on our Focus on Growth, Navigating the Fog of Change series. Until the next time, keep leading forward.